Wooler was surprised to see them. In the course of booking the date, John Lennon had bristled that the fee wasn't worth all the effort, and Wooler pleaded, "For God's sake, don't let me down." Lennon assured him that they would turn up, but Wooler was skeptical. Still, he decided to put them on at 9 o'clock, the center spot, as it was known, between the Deltones and the Searchers. It meant that everyone would be inside the hall, Wooler recalls, no one entering late or arriving early. For a half hour, they would have Liverpool's complete attention. Why Wooler did this remains a mystery, even to himself. Although he'd heard the band on an earlier occasion, it was only for a song before he fled to the refuge of a pub, leaving him without much of an opinion. Nor was he encouraged by their attitude. But as a victim of artistic frustration, Bob was drawn inexorably to the band's sorry predicament, especially to John's vulnerability. Wooler sensed in Lennon a person of awesome complexity and ambition. The boy seemed to emanate heat, signaling some kind of raw, restless talent. There was something there worth exploring, he concluded, so I just trusted my instinct that they would go down in an unusual, important way. The house was full, framed in hazy silhouette, not a fleet of drunken sailors like in Hamburg, but local teenagers, many of whom they'd gone to school with. Wooler busied himself with preparations, but between the second and third records of the intermission, there was a rule, 3 songs between acts, no more, to avoid the possibility of fights. He walked over to deliver some last-minute advice. "I'll announce you," he hastened to tell them, "then go straight into a number as soon as the curtain opens." He watched the recognition register on the boys' faces, but noted a faint disapproval in their manner. So be it, he thought. Out front they could hear the overheated crowd, its attention span dipping away. The throng of teenagers wanted action. They had danced distractedly between acts. The records were no substitute for the real thing. And now, in the rambling fade and strident signaled an excitement that sought to condense into impatience. Besides, there was a general curiosity about the next band, which had been added in the 11th hour and was advertised as being direct from Hamburg, a German act. It would be interesting, from the pitch of their accents to their delivery, to see how they contrasted with the sharpness of Liverpool's top bands. The hall was packed with teenagers, many of whom had gathered at card tables along both sidewalks to await the next act. The majority were attired in what were respectfully called fancy dress for what remained of the holiday festivities. The well-scrubbed boys, whose dark suits were also their school uniforms, looked stiff and self-conscious, while girls, sheathed in tight calf-length skirts and white shirts, paraded gaily to and from the upstairs bathroom, applying last-minute retouches to their makeup. Those who danced drifted casually across the big open dance floor, keeping an eye on the stage as the band shifted into place behind the curtain. Promptly, amps crackled in resistance. John and George plugged into a shared True Voice that saw them through infancy, while Paul switched on his trusty Seaphone green Ampigo. The crowd stirred and half-turned while Bob Wooler crooned into an open mic. "And now, everybody, the band you've been waiting for, direct from Hamburg." But before he got their name out, Paul McCartney jumped the gun, and in a raw, shrill burst as the curtain swung open, hollered, "I'm going to tell Aunt Mary about Uncle John. He said he had the misery, but he got a lot of fun. Oh, baby." The aimless shuffle stopped dead in its tracks. The reaction of the audience was so unexpected that Wooler had failed, in the first few seconds, to take note of it. Part of the reason was the shocking explosion that shook the hall. A whomp of bass drum accompanied each quarter note with terrific force. The first one struck after Paul screamed, "Tell!" so that the charge ricocheted wildly off the walls. There was a second on Mary, and another, then a terrible volley that had the familiar bam-bam-bam of a Messerschmitt, wreaking all hell on a local target, an assault innocent of madness. The pounding came in rhythmic waves, and once it started, it did not stop. There was nowhere to take cover on the open floor. All heads snapped forward and stared, wild-eyed, at the deafening ambush. The music crashing around them was discernibly a species of rock and roll, but played unlike any they'd ever heard before. "Ooh, baby, yeah! Now, baby, ooh!" It was convulsive, ugly, frightening, and visceral in the way it touched off frenzy in the crowd. The band's physical appearance created another commotion. For a tense moment, the crowd just stared, awestruck, trying to take in the whole disturbing scene. 4 of the musicians were dressed in the black suits they'd bought at the Texas shop in Hamburg. Beautiful cracked leather jackets with padded shoulders and artificial sheepskin lining that proved sweltering under the lights. Black t-shirts and silky, skin-tight pants. With instruments slung low across their bodies, they looked like a teenage rebel fantasy come to life. Nor could anyone take his eyes off the rude cowboy boots with flat, chopped heels that each man wore, especially John Lennon's, which were ornate twin eagles emblazoned with birds carved on both the front and back and outlined with white stitching. "I'd never seen any band like this before," says Dave Forshaw, a Liverpool promoter, who gazed on the spectacle in utter astonishment. "I thought, what are they? Who are they?" As if someone had flashed a prearranged cue, the entire crowd rushed the stage, pressing feverishly toward the footlights. Impetuous girls and boys alike abandoned their social proprieties to a purely emotional response. Everyone had stopped dancing. There was now a total gravitation toward the stage. Sensing that a fight had broken out, Brian Kelly rushed inside with several bouncers in tow. The promoter experienced a moment of real panic. According to Bob Wooler, long afterwards, Kelly told me that they were seconds away from using brute force when he finally realized what the fuss was about. The band, too, arrived at the same conclusion and began working the crowd into a sweat. They turned up the juice and tore into a wild jam. Drawing upon stage antics they devised while in Germany, they twisted and jerked their bodies with indignant energy. John and George proceeded to lunge around like snapping dogs and stomped loudly on the bandstand in time with the music. "It was just so different," recalls Bill Ashton, an apprentice fitter for British Rail who sang part-time as Billy Kramer with a band called the Coasters, and had come to Litherland to size up the foreign competition. "To act that way on stage and make that kind of sound, I was totally staggered." Like everyone else, Kramer was used to bands that patterned themselves after Cliff Richard and the Shadows, England's top rock and roll act, and practitioners of smooth, carefully tended choreography. Up till then, everyone had followed the Shadows' dainty footsteps. This band, however, was a beast of a different nature. According to Dave Forshaw, normally popular Liverpool bands such as the Remo Four or the Dominoes would come on and perform in a polite, orderly way. This band's performance attacked the crowd. They played aggressively and with a lot less respect. They just attacked them. And when John Lennon stepped to the mic and challenged the crowd to get your knickers down, the audience, in a state of unconscious, indiscriminate euphoria, screamed and raised their arms in delight. Brian Kelly especially perceived a seismic shift in the landscape and moved fast to contain it by posting bouncers at the doors to prohibit rival promoters like Forshaw from poaching his bounty. But it was too late for such empty measures. The house erupted in hysteria as the band concluded its half-hour set with a rousing version of What I Say, in which Paul McCartney jackknifed through the crowd, whipping the kids into rapturous confrontation. Over the last wild applause, Bob Wooler managed to say, "That was fantastic, fellas." But it was doubtful anyone paid much attention to him. They were too busy trying to connect with what had just gone down on that stage, what had turned their little Christmas dance into a full-scale epiphany. This much was inevitable. The band had somehow squeezed every nerve of the local rock and roll scene, and that scene would never be the same. In the wall of grinding sound and the veil of black leather, they had staked their claim to history. In that instant, they had become the Beatles.